Sophie Bennett stared at the ornate Victorian duplex with a mixture of disbelief and pure joy, her coffee-stained portfolio clutched against her chest like armor. After 3 years of cramped studio apartments and roommates who ate her labeled leftovers, she had actually won something for once in her life, a housing lottery that felt too good to be true. Beautiful, isn't it? Came a warm voice from behind her. Sophie turned to find a tall man with gentle brown eyes, examining the same building with the careful attention of someone who noticed details others missed. His dark hair was slightly mussed, as if he'd been running his hands through it, and he wore a simple navy sweater that somehow looked perfectly put together despite its casual simplicity. "Are you here about the lottery too?" Sophie asked, tucking a wayward strand of auburn hair behind her ear. "Benjamin Cross," he said, extending his hand with a shy smile that transformed his entire face. "And yes, apparently we're about to become neighbors. I won apartment B, Sophie Bennett, apartment A." She shook his hand, noting how warm and steady his grip was. "I still can't believe this is real. A Victorian duplex with shared common areas and rent that won't require me to sell a kidney?" Benjamin laughed, a rich, genuine sound that made Sophie's stomach do a small, unexpected flip. "Mrs. Henderson, our landlord, has some interesting theories about compatible tenants. Apparently we passed her mysterious screening process." As if summoned by the mention of her name, a tiny elderly woman with silver curls and twinkling eyes appeared on the front porch, wearing a floral apron and carrying a plate of what smelled like fresh-baked cookies. "My dears," Mrs. Henderson called, waving enthusiastically. "Perfect timing. Come, let me show you your new home." The next hour passed in a blur of hardwood floors, bay windows, and Mrs. Henderson's running commentary about the house's romantic history. Sophie found herself stealing glances at Benjamin as he asked thoughtful questions about the architectural details, the way his eyes lit up when he noticed the original crown molding, the careful way he examined the shared library space. "The common areas are what make this special," Mrs. Henderson explained, leading them through a cozy living room with a working fireplace and built-in bookshelves. "The kitchen is fully equipped for shared meals, though each apartment has its own kitchenette. I find that strangers who become friends make the very best tenants." Sophie caught Benjamin's eye and smiled. There was something about him that made her feel instantly comfortable, like she'd known him longer than an hour. He had a way of listening that made her feel heard, and when Mrs. Henderson mentioned the apartment's history of successful matches, Sophie didn't miss the slight blush that colored his cheeks. "Now," Mrs. Henderson continued, pressing a set of ornate keys into each of their hands, "I have one rule. No overnight guests for the first month. I want you two to get to know each other properly before adding complications." "Mrs. Henderson," Sophie said carefully, "I think you might have the wrong impression." "We're not, of course not, dear." "Not yet." The elderly woman's eyes twinkled with mischief. "But this house has a way of working its magic. You'll see." Over the next few days, Sophie settled into her apartment with the kind of contentment she hadn't felt in years. Her space was perfect, bright and airy with windows that caught the morning light, built-in shelves perfect for her design books, and a small alcove that would make an ideal workspace. But what she loved most were the unexpected moments of connection with Benjamin. He appeared whenever she needed help, holding the door when she struggled with groceries, offering tools when she hung pictures, sharing coffee in the common kitchen during their overlapping morning routines. He moved through the shared spaces like he was choreographing a dance around her schedule. Always helpful but never intrusive. "You're up early," Sophie said one morning, finding Benjamin in the kitchen with 2 mugs of coffee already prepared. "I like the quiet," he said, handing her a mug prepared exactly how she liked it, strong, with just a splash of vanilla cream. "I hope you don't mind. I noticed you always add vanilla." Sophie stared at him in surprise. In 3 days, he'd noticed her coffee preferences. Her ex-boyfriend of 2 years had never managed to remember she preferred tea over coffee. "Thank you," she said softly, touched by the simple thoughtfulness. "That's really sweet." Benjamin's smile was shy but pleased. "It's nothing. I just pay attention." And he did pay attention, Sophie realized over the following days. He noticed when she worked late, and left fresh flowers from Mrs. Henderson's garden on the shared kitchen table. He noticed when she seemed stressed and wordlessly left her favorite type of chocolate beside her coffee mug. He noticed when she hummed while cooking and started playing soft jazz in the common areas during her usual cooking times. Sophie found herself looking forward to these small interactions more than she wanted to admit. Benjamin was unlike anyone she'd ever known, quietly thoughtful, genuinely kind, and possessed of a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard at the most unexpected moments. "Mrs. Henderson asked me to mention that she's having a dinner party this weekend," Benjamin said one evening as they shared the common space, Sophie sketching at the large table while Benjamin read in the nearby armchair. "She'd like us both to attend as her favorite tenants. Should I be worried about her matchmaking attempts?" Sophie asked, glancing up from her design work. "Probably," Benjamin said, not looking up from his book, but Sophie caught his smile. "She's already asked me 3 times if I think you're pretty." "And what did you tell her?" Benjamin finally looked up, meeting her eyes with an expression so sincere it made her breath catch. "I told her that was an understatement." That night, Sophie discovered something that changed everything. Hidden behind a loose floorboard in her bedroom closet, she found a small wooden box. Inside were dozens of notes in Benjamin's careful handwriting. Observations about her daily routines, sketches of her working in the garden, pressed flowers from days when she'd seemed sad. At the bottom of the box was a letter addressed to "The Girl Who Doesn't Know I Exist," dated 3 weeks before the housing lottery. Sophie's hands trembled as she read the first line. "I've been watching you for months, and I think I'm falling in love with someone who will never see me as more than a neighbor." Sophie stared at the contents of the wooden box spread across her bed, her heart racing with a mixture of confusion and something that felt dangerously close to excitement. The notes were beautiful, not creepy or invasive, but tender observations written by someone who saw her in ways she'd never seen herself. Day 12. She hums when she's happy. Today she was humming while arranging flowers, and I realized I'd do anything to make sure she never stops. Day 23. She left chocolate chip cookies for Mrs. Henderson when she was sick. She pretends to be tough, but she has the softest heart I've ever encountered. Day 31. She fell asleep reading in the garden today. I wanted to bring her a blanket, but I didn't want to intrude. Instead, I moved the sprinkler so it wouldn't wake her. Each note was dated, carefully folded and tied with different colored ribbons that Sophie gradually realized corresponded to her moods. Blue for sad days, yellow for happy ones, red for the days when she seemed frustrated with her freelance design work. Sophie carefully placed everything back in the box and returned it to its hiding place. She needed time to think, to process the revelation that Benjamin had been noticing her long before their chance meeting at the duplex. But instead of feeling violated or uncomfortable, she felt something entirely unexpected, cherished. The next morning, Sophie found herself studying Benjamin with new eyes as they shared coffee in the common kitchen. Had he always looked at her with such warmth, or was she only noticing it now? When he asked about her latest design project, was there something more than polite interest in his questions? "Earth to Sophie," Benjamin said gently, waving a hand in front of her face. "You've been staring at your coffee for 5 minutes. Either it's the most fascinating breakfast beverage in history, or something's on your mind." "Sorry," Sophie said, shaking herself back to the present, "just thinking about work stuff." But work was the last thing on her mind. All day, as she tried to focus on designing logos for a local bakery, Sophie found herself replaying every interaction with Benjamin, looking for signs she might have missed. The way he always seemed to appear when she needed help, the way he remembered tiny details about her preferences, the way his eyes crinkled when she laughed at his quiet jokes. That evening, their usual routine of sharing the common space felt charged with new awareness. Sophie worked on her sketches while Benjamin read, but she found herself stealing glances at him, wondering what he was thinking, whether he was aware of her watching him the way he'd apparently been watching her. "Sophie," Benjamin said suddenly, closing his book, "can I ask you something?" Her heart jumped. Did he know about the box? Of course. Mrs. Henderson mentioned you might want to plant a garden in the backyard. Would you like help? I'm not much of a gardener, but I'm good at following directions. Sophie felt a rush of warmth that had nothing to do with the fireplace. "You'd want to help with that?" "I'd want to help with anything that makes you happy," Benjamin said simply, then seemed to realize how that sounded. A blush crept up his neck. "I mean, as your friend. Neighbor. Sophie couldn't help but smile at his flustered explanation. "Friend-neighbor works, and yes, I'd love your help." Over the next 2 weeks, they spent their evenings planning the garden, poring over seed catalogs, and sketching layouts on the back of Sophie's design paper. Benjamin listened to her ideas with the kind of attention usually reserved for architectural blueprints, asking thoughtful questions and offering suggestions that showed he'd been paying attention to her aesthetic preferences. "Sunflowers here," Sophie said, pointing to a sunny corner of their planned layout. "They're cheerful, and they'll attract bees. And lavender along the border," Benjamin added. "You mentioned once that it helps you sleep." Sophie looked up from their planning, struck again by his attentiveness. "You remember that?" "I remember everything you tell me," Benjamin said, meeting her eyes with an intensity that made her stomach flutter. "Is that weird?" "It's wonderful," Sophie said softly, and meant it. Their friendship deepened as they worked together in the garden, their conversations ranging from design philosophy to childhood memories to dreams for the future. Benjamin was an excellent listener, drawing out stories Sophie had never shared with anyone. In return, he revealed glimpses of his own quiet dreams, his love of sustainable architecture, his desire to design homes that brought families together, his secret wish to travel and sketch buildings around the world. "You should do it," Sophie said one evening as they watered their newly planted seedlings. "The travel, I mean. Life's too short to keep dreams on hold." "Maybe someday," Benjamin said, but his tone suggested someday felt very far away. "Why not now? You're talented, you have savings, you're young and unattached." "I'm not unattached," Benjamin said quietly. Sophie's breath caught. "You're not?" Benjamin looked at her for a long moment, something vulnerable and hopeful in his expression. "I'm attached to this place, to this life we're building. He stopped abruptly, shaking his head. "To the routine. I like our routine." Sophie felt a flutter of disappointment mixed with something that might have been relief. For a moment, she'd thought he might say something different, something that would change everything between them. "Speaking of routine," Sophie said, trying to keep her voice light, "I might have to break it this weekend. My friend Sarah wants to set me up on a blind date." The watering can slipped from Benjamin's hand, soaking his shoes. "A date?" I know. Blind dates are usually disasters. But she swears this guy is perfect for me, and I haven't dated anyone in months, so—" Sophie shrugged, trying to ignore the way Benjamin's face had gone carefully blank. "It's probably time I got back out there." "Right," Benjamin said, his voice oddly strained. "Of course. You should definitely do that." That night, Sophie heard Benjamin pacing in his apartment, his footsteps echoing through the thin walls until nearly dawn. When she woke in the morning, she found a note slipped under her door in his familiar handwriting. "Have fun on your date. You deserve someone who sees how extraordinary you are, even if it kills me to watch." Sophie stared at the note, her heart pounding with the sudden, overwhelming realization that she didn't want to go on a date with anyone else. She wanted to stay here, in this house with Benjamin. But by the time she worked up the courage to knock on his door, he was already gone, leaving only the lingering scent of his cologne and the echo of what felt like a goodbye. The blind date was every bit the disaster Sophie had predicted it would be. Marcus Chen was handsome enough, successful, and perfectly polite, but he spent the entire evening talking about his CrossFit achievements and seemed genuinely confused when Sophie mentioned she was a graphic designer. "So, you make websites?" he asked, cutting into his steak with the precision of someone who treated meals like training sessions. "Sometimes. I also do branding, logos, print design." Sophie trailed off, realizing he'd already lost interest and was checking his phone. By dessert, Sophie was mentally composing an apology text to Sarah and counting the minutes until she could politely escape. All she wanted was to go home to the duplex, to find Benjamin reading in the common room with 2 cups of tea waiting. to lose herself in their easy conversation and forget this awkward evening ever happened. The rain started as Marcus walked her to her car, a light drizzle that quickly became a downpour. He gave her a perfunctory hug goodbye and sprinted to his own car without offering to wait until she was safely inside hers. Sophie sat in her driver's seat for a moment, listening to the rain pound against her windshield, and felt a profound sense of loneliness that had nothing to do with being alone and everything to do with being with the wrong person. Benjamin would have waited, she thought, and then immediately felt guilty for comparing every man to her friend neighbor who left her notes under doors and remembered how she liked her coffee. The drive home should have taken 20 minutes. Sophie had made the trip dozens of times, knew every turn and traffic light between the restaurant and the duplex. But the rain made visibility nearly impossible, and she was distracted by thoughts of Benjamin's note, by the growing certainty that she'd been an idiot to go on this date, when the person who made her happiest was waiting at home. She never saw the truck that ran, the red light. The impact sent Sophie's. Car spinning across the intersection, metal screaming against asphalt, glass exploding in a shower of diamonds that caught the streetlight like confetti. Her last coherent thought before everything went black was that she hadn't told Benjamin she was sorry for hurting him. Benjamin had been pacing his apartment for 3 hours, checking his phone obsessively and trying not to imagine Sophie laughing at another man's jokes, smiling at someone who couldn't possibly appreciate the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her work, or how she unconsciously hummed while she cooked. When the phone finally rang at 11:43 p.m., Benjamin lunged for it, expecting to hear Sophie's voice telling him about her terrible date, ready to listen and comfort and pretend his heart wasn't breaking. Instead, he heard a stranger's voice. "Is this Benjamin Cross? You're listed as Sophie Bennett's emergency contact." Benjamin's blood turned to ice. "What happened?" "There's been an accident. Ms. Bennett is at St. Mary's Hospital. You should come immediately." Benjamin didn't remember the drive to the hospital, didn't remember speaking to the receptionist or finding his way to the ICU waiting room. All he remembered was the word accident, echoing in his mind like a prayer he didn't know how to finish. Dr. Patricia Williams found him there an hour later, still clutching his keys, still wearing the paint-stained t-shirt he'd thrown on in his rush to leave the house. "Mr. Cross, I'm Dr. Williams, Sophie's neurologist." "Is she—" Benjamin couldn't finish the question. "She's alive," Dr. Williams said gently. "She's stable, but there are complications." Benjamin's legs gave out, and he sank into one of the waiting room's uncomfortable plastic chairs. "What kind of complications?" "Sophie sustained a significant head injury in the accident. She's conscious now, but she's experiencing retrograde amnesia. She can't remember the last several months of her life." "How much can't she remember?" Dr. Williams sat down beside him, her expression kind but serious. "She remembers her childhood, her college years, her early career. But everything from about 6 months ago forward is gone. She doesn't remember moving to the duplex. She doesn't remember you." Benjamin felt something inside his chest shatter. Will it come back? Memory recovery after traumatic brain injury is unpredictable. Sometimes memories return gradually, sometimes all at once, sometimes not at all. We won't know more until she's had time to heal. "Can I see her?" Dr. Williams hesitated. "She's very confused and frightened. Having strangers visit might make her anxiety worse." "I'm not a stranger," Benjamin said desperately. He stopped, realizing he had no idea how to finish that sentence. They weren't dating. They weren't engaged. They were friends, neighbors, two people who had been dancing around something deeper for months without ever naming it. "Who are you to her, Mr. Cross?" Benjamin looked at the doctor, then at his hands, still shaking from adrenaline and fear. "I'm the person who loves her," he said quietly. "Even if she doesn't know that yet." Dr. Williams studied his face for a long moment. "She's in room 314, but please go slowly. Let her set the pace." Benjamin walked down the hospital corridor on unsteady legs, his heart hammering against his ribs. Through the small window in her door, he could see Sophie propped up in bed, looking small and fragile against the white sheets. There were bandages on her forehead and her left arm was in a sling, but she was awake, staring at the ceiling with the lost expression of someone trying to piece together a puzzle with half the pieces missing. He knocked softly and entered when she turned toward the door. Their eyes met, and Benjamin held his breath, hoping for some flicker of recognition, some sign that their months of shared coffee and garden planning and quiet conversation had left an impression deeper than conscious memory. "Hi," Sophie said softly, her voice hoarse but warm. "Are you here to see me?" "Yes," Benjamin said, his throat tight with emotion. "I'm Benjamin. We're friends." Sophie studied his face with the intense concentration of someone trying to remember a dream. "You look worried," she said finally. Are you someone important to me?" Benjamin stood frozen in the hospital doorway, his heart breaking and rebuilding itself in the space of a single heartbeat. Sophie was looking at him with complete trust, as if she could sense that he was safe even if she couldn't remember why. "Yes," he said softly, the word carrying months of unspoken truth. "I'm someone who cares about you very much." Sophie's eyes filled with tears of relief. "I was so scared," she whispered. "I couldn't remember anything, and I thought I was all alone." She reached out her uninjured hand toward him. "Will you stay with me?" Benjamin took her hand, feeling the weight of the choice before him. He could tell her the truth about their friendship, or he could become whatever she needed him to be. "Of course," he said, and didn't let go. Benjamin sat beside Sophie's hospital bed, her hand still clasped in his, and felt the enormous weight of the moment settling around them like snow. She was looking at him with such trust, such relief at having someone familiar in her frightening new reality, that he couldn't bear to tell her they'd only known each other for a few months. "I'm sorry," Sophie said, her voice small and uncertain. "I know you said we're friends, but I can't remember. How long have we known each other?" Benjamin's mouth went dry. This was it. The moment where he either told her the truth about their still developing friendship, or... "We've been close for a while," he said carefully, which was true, even if a while meant months rather than years. "Close?" Sophie's eyes searched his face. "How close?" Before Benjamin could answer, a nurse bustled into the room carrying a clipboard and wearing the kind of professionally cheerful expression that hospital staff perfected. "Good morning, Sophie. How are we feeling today? And this must be your fiancé, the one who's been calling every hour since last night." Sophie's eyes went wide. "Fiancé?" Benjamin opened his mouth to correct the misunderstanding, but Sophie was already looking at him with wonder and something that looked like joy. "We're engaged?" she whispered. Benjamin's voice failed him. He looked at Sophie's hopeful face, at the way her grip on his hand had tightened, at the relief washing over her features, as the pieces of her life seemed to click into place. "Yes," he heard himself say. "We're engaged," the nurse beamed. "How romantic. Young love is so beautiful. I'll make sure your information is updated in our system, Mr. Cross Benjamin Cross. Perfect. Now, Sophie, your fiancé has been asking about bringing some of your things from home to make you more comfortable. Would that be all right?" Sophie nodded, her eyes never leaving Benjamin's face. "That would be wonderful. I'm sorry I can't remember our engagement." "Was it recent?" "Very recent," Benjamin said, hating himself for the lie even as he spoke it. "You were still getting used to the idea." After the nurse left, Sophie studied Benjamin with the same intensity she'd once brought to her design work, as if she could will the memories back through sheer concentration. "I wish I could remember," she said softly. "You must think I'm terrible, forgetting something so important." "You could never be terrible," Benjamin said, and this was the absolute truth. "And this isn't your fault. The accident, the memory loss, none of it is your fault." "Tell me about us," Sophie said, settling back against her pillows. "How did we meet? When did you know you loved me?" Benjamin's heart hammered against his ribs. Every instinct screamed at him to tell her the truth, but Sophie was looking at him like he was her anchor in a storm, and he couldn't bring himself to cut her loose. "We met through housing," he said carefully. "We both needed a place to live, and we found this perfect duplex. Mrs. Henderson, our landlord, she has theories about compatible people." Sophie smiled. "She sounds lovely. And when did you propose?" Benjamin swallowed hard. "We were planning it. The timing wasn't quite right yet. But you were going to." Benjamin looked into Sophie's eyes that had watched him tend their garden, that had lit up when he brought her morning coffee, that had seen him in ways he'd never been seen before, and said, "Yes, I was going to ask you to marry me," and that at least was true. 3 hours later, Benjamin stood in Sophie's apartment, surrounded by the evidence of her life, trying to figure out how to pack the belongings of his supposed fiancée without revealing that he'd only been inside her personal space a handful of times. He knew where she kept her coffee, cupboard above the sink, knew she had a collection of vintage design books, living room shelves, knew she kept photos of her family on her dresser. He'd glimpsed them through her open bedroom door. But he didn't know which pajamas she preferred, which toiletries were essential, which comfort items would make her feel most at home. Benjamin found himself standing in Sophie's bedroom doorway, feeling like an intruder despite the hospital's assumption that he belonged there. Her space was exactly what he'd imagined, bright and organized, with sketches tacked to a bulletin board and plants on every windowsill. On her nightstand was a framed photo of her with a woman who must be Sarah, her best friend, Sarah. Benjamin's stomach clenched as he realized he would have to navigate Sophie's relationships, would have to convince the people who actually knew her that he was her fiancé. The thought made him feel sick with guilt and terror. He gathered what he hoped were the right things: comfortable clothes, personal photos, her favorite blanket, soft blue, draped over her reading chair. The design book she'd been reading, still open to a page about color theory, bookmarked with a grocery receipt. Each item felt like a small violation of trust, even as he chose them with the care of someone who genuinely wanted Sophie to be comfortable. On his way out, Benjamin stopped at the loose floorboard where he'd hidden his notes. The wooden box was still there, filled with months of observations and sketches and the careful documentation of his growing feelings. He stared at it for a long moment, then carefully lifted it out and carried it to his apartment. If Sophie was going to believe they were engaged, she couldn't find evidence that he'd been watching her like a lovesick stranger, but he couldn't bring himself to throw the notes away either. They were the only proof he had that his feelings were real, that this whole terrible situation hadn't started with a lie. Benjamin was packing the last of Sophie's things when he heard the front door open downstairs. "Sophie?" called a familiar voice. Sarah, Sophie's best friend, the one person who would definitely know that Benjamin and Sophie weren't engaged. Footsteps pounded up the stairs toward Sophie's apartment, and Benjamin realized he had about 30 seconds to figure out how to convince Sarah to go along with the biggest lie of his life. "Sophie, are you here? The hospital called and said some guy claiming to be your fiancé." Sarah appeared in the bedroom doorway and stopped dead, her eyes narrowing as she took in Benjamin surrounded by Sophie's belongings. "Who the hell are you? And what are you doing in my best friend's apartment?" Sarah Martinez stood in Sophie's bedroom doorway like an avenging angel in designer jeans, her dark eyes blazing with protective fury. At 5'2", she looked like she could take on Benjamin's 6-foot frame without breaking a sweat. And Benjamin had no doubt she would if she thought he was a threat to Sophie. "I'm Benjamin Cross," he said, setting down the sweater he'd been folding and raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. "Sophie's neighbor." "Neighbor?" Sarah's voice rose an octave. "The hospital said you were her fiancé. They said you've been calling all night, that you're listed as her emergency contact." Benjamin's mouth went dry. "It's complicated." "Complicated?" Sarah stepped into the room, and Benjamin noticed she was holding her phone like a weapon. "Sophie's been dating a string of disasters for the past 6 months. Trust me, I would remember if she was engaged to someone, especially someone she's never mentioned." "Sarah, please. Let me explain. Start talking. Now. Because if you're some creep who's taking advantage of Sophie's memory loss, I swear I will end you." Benjamin looked at Sarah's fierce expression and made a decision that felt like jumping off a cliff. "She doesn't remember me," he said quietly. "The accident. She's lost the last 6 months of her memory. She doesn't remember moving to the duplex, doesn't remember us becoming friends." "Friends?" Sarah's eyes narrowed further. "What kind of friends?" "The kind where I was falling in love with her and she had no idea." Benjamin sank onto Sophie's bed, the weight of his confession settling around him like lead. "The kind where I've been leaving her little gifts and notes, hoping she'd notice me as more than just a neighbor." The kind where watching her go on that date last night nearly killed me. Sarah's expression shifted from suspicion to something that might have been understanding. You're the mysterious neighbor who's been making her coffee and leaving flowers. She told you about that? She told me someone had been doing sweet things for her, but she didn't know who. She thought maybe it was Mrs. Henderson being nice. Sarah studied Benjamin's face with the calculating gaze of someone who'd spent years protecting her best friend from heartbreak. And now she thinks you're her fiancé? The nurse assumed, and I couldn't correct her. Sophie was so scared, so lost, and when she thought we were engaged, she looked so relieved. Like finally something in her life made sense. So you lied to her? Yes. Benjamin met Sarah's eyes, not trying to hide his shame. I lied to the woman I love because I'm a coward who couldn't bear to see her afraid. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, studying Benjamin like she was reading his soul. What's your plan here? Pretend to be her fiancé until her memory comes back and she realizes you've been lying to her for weeks? I don't have a plan, Benjamin admitted. I just know that right now, believing we're engaged is the only thing keeping her from falling apart. And I can't be the one to take that away from her. Even though it's built on a lie? Sarah sighed and sank into Sophie's reading chair, looking suddenly tired. She's my best friend, you know. Has been since college. I've watched her go through a parade of guys who didn't appreciate her, who didn't see how special she is. I see it, Benjamin said softly. I've seen it from the moment I met her. I know. Sarah's voice was gentle now, understanding. I can see it in the way you packed her things. These are exactly what she would have chosen. Her favorite sweater, her comfort books, that ridiculous throw pillow she's had since graduation. She looked at Benjamin with something that might have been approval. Someone who didn't know her wouldn't have known to bring the lavender lotion she uses when she can't sleep. Benjamin felt a flicker of hope. Does that mean? It means I'm going to help you, Sarah said firmly. Not because I approve of lying to Sophie, but because I've never seen her as happy as she's been these past few months. She's been humming again, smiling at nothing, turning down dates because she said she was waiting for something better. She said that? She said she thought maybe she was falling for someone, but she wasn't sure if he felt the same way. Sarah's smile was sad and knowing. Turns out she was right. Together, they finished packing Sophie's belongings. With Sarah providing crucial details Benjamin wouldn't have known. That Sophie slept with a white noise machine. That she had a lucky charm bracelet she wore during stressful times. That she kept a journal where she wrote down 3 good things that happened each day. She's been writing about you, Sarah said, pulling the journal from Sophie's nightstand drawer. Not by name, but, my sweet neighbor brought me flowers today. Someone left chocolate on my kitchen counter with a note that said, have a good day. I think the universe might be trying to tell me something. Benjamin's chest tightened with emotion. She noticed. She more than noticed. She was falling for you too, Benjamin. She was just too scared to admit it. Sarah closed the journal and added it to Sophie's hospital bag. The question is, what are you going to do when her memory comes back and she remembers that you were friends, not fiancés? I don't know, Benjamin said honestly. I'm hoping that by then maybe the engagement part will be true. And if it's not? Benjamin looked around Sophie's bedroom, at the evidence of her life and dreams and the future she'd been building. Then I'll have to live with losing the best thing that ever happened to me. As Benjamin and Sarah loaded Sophie's belongings into his car, Sarah suddenly grabbed his arm with a grip that could bend steel. There's something else you need to know, she said urgently. Sophie didn't go on that blind date because she wanted to. She went because she thought you weren't interested in her romantically. She's been carrying around some letter she found. Something about watching her from afar, but never being more than a neighbor. Benjamin's blood turned to ice as he realized Sophie had found his hidden notes. Sarah, he said carefully, what exactly did the letter say? Sarah's expression was grim. It said that whoever wrote it was in love with someone who would never see him as more than a friend. Sophie's been heartbroken, thinking the mystery person who'd been so kind to her was in love with someone else entirely. The ride home from the hospital was surreal. like stepping into an alternate reality where Benjamin's deepest wishes had come true under the worst possible circumstances. Sophie sat beside him in the passenger seat, her injured arm cradled carefully, studying the familiar streets with the intense concentration of someone trying to unlock hidden memories. "It's beautiful here," she said as they pulled up to the Victorian duplex. And Benjamin's heart clenched at the wonder in her voice. She was seeing their shared home for what she believed was the first time, looking at it the way he had that first day, like stumbling upon a fairy tale. Mrs. Henderson was waiting on the front porch, having somehow heard about the accident through the neighborhood grapevine that moved faster than social media. She rushed to help Sophie out of the car, fussing over her bandages and sling with the fierce tenderness of an adoptive grandmother. "My poor dear," Mrs. Henderson said, wrapping Sophie in a careful hug that avoided her injured arm. "Benjamin has been beside himself with worry. He barely left the hospital, you know. That's how you know you found a good one." Sophie smiled, leaning into the elderly woman's embrace. "You must be Mrs. Henderson. Benjamin told me you have theories about compatible people." "Indeed I do, and I'm never wrong." Mrs. Henderson's eyes twinkled as she looked between them. "Though I must say this wasn't quite how I expected things to develop." Benjamin shot Mrs. Henderson a warning look over Sophie's head, but the older woman just winked and ushered them inside. The next few hours passed in a careful choreography of deception and genuine care. Benjamin showed Sophie around what he claimed was their shared home, pointing out details that were true even if the context was fabricated. The kitchen where they'd shared morning coffee, the common living room where they'd planned their garden, the backyard where their flowers were just beginning to bloom. "We planted those together?" Sophie asked, looking at the neat rows of seedlings with delight. "You said sunflowers would be cheerful," Benjamin said, his throat tight with the memory. "And you wanted lavender because it helps you sleep." "That sounds like me." Sophie's smile was soft and wondering. "I can almost remember, or maybe I just want to remember." Benjamin settled Sophie into her own apartment, though he told her it was the space they shared. He'd moved some of his belongings there during her hospital stay, creating the illusion of a couple's shared life. His extra coffee mug in her kitchen, a few of his books on her shelves, his sweater draped over her reading chair. "This feels right," Sophie said, curling up on her couch with the blue blanket Benjamin had brought from the hospital. "Like home." "It is home," Benjamin said, and meant it in every way that mattered. That night, Benjamin made dinner, Sophie's favorite pasta with the homemade sauce she'd taught him to make weeks ago, though he told her it was their usual recipe. They ate by candlelight in the common dining room, Sophie asking gentle questions about their relationship that Benjamin answered with careful half-truths. "How long were we together before you proposed?" Sophie asked, twirling pasta around her fork with her good hand. "We took our time," Benjamin said. "We wanted to be sure." "And you were sure?" Benjamin met her eyes across the candlelit table. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." It wasn't until Sophie was getting ready for bed that Benjamin realized the flaw in his plan. She emerged from her bedroom in soft pajamas, looking uncertain and vulnerable. "Benjamin?" she said quietly. "I know this is going to sound strange, but where do you usually sleep?" Benjamin's heart stopped. Of course she would expect her fiancé to share her bed, or at least her bedroom. The hospital staff had assumed they lived together completely, not that they were still in the early stages of a friendship with separate apartments. Benjamin's mind raced. "I've been sleeping on the couch since the accident. I wanted to be nearby in case you needed anything, but I didn't want to crowd you while you're healing." Sophie's expression softened. "You don't have to do that. I mean, if we're engaged, surely that is, I assume we're comfortable sharing." She trailed off, blushing. "Sophie," Benjamin said gently, "you've been through a trauma. There's no pressure for anything to be normal right away. I just want you to feel safe and comfortable." Relief flickered across her features. "Thank you. I feel like I should remember being intimate with you, and it scares me that I don't. Like I'm failing at being your fiancé." "You could never fail at anything," Benjamin said fiercely. "And there's no timeline for healing. We have all the time in the world." Benjamin made a nest of blankets on Sophie's couch, close enough to hear if she needed anything, but far enough away to preserve both their dignity. He lay awake listening to her breathe in the next room, overwhelmed by the surreal intimacy of sharing her space, of being trusted with her vulnerability. Around midnight, he heard her crying, soft, heartbroken sounds that made his chest ache with empathy and guilt. He knocked gently on her bedroom door. "Sophie, are you okay?" "I'm sorry," came her muffled voice. "I didn't mean to wake you. You didn't wake me. Can I come in?" He found her sitting up in bed, tears streaming down her face in the moonlight streaming through her window. Without thinking, Benjamin sat on the edge of her bed and pulled her into a careful hug. "It's so frustrating," Sophie said against his shoulder. "I feel like I'm living someone else's life. I can't remember falling in love with you. Can't remember saying yes when you proposed. Can't remember building this beautiful life together. What if I never remember? What if I never feel like myself again?" "You are yourself," Benjamin said, stroking her hair with infinite gentleness. "Memory or no memory, you're still Sophie. You're still kind and creative and funny and brave. You're still the woman who hums while she cooks and leaves extra cookies for the mailman." "I do that?" "You do that. And you still notice when people need help, and you still make the most beautiful art, and you still see good in everything." Benjamin pulled back to look at her face. "The woman I fell in love with isn't just your memories, Sophie. She's your heart. And that hasn't changed." Sophie studied his face in the moonlight. "How can you be so sure?" "Because I'm seeing her right now. Worried about me sleeping on the couch, apologizing for crying when anyone would cry in your situation, trusting me to take care of you even when you can't remember why you should trust me." Benjamin touched her cheek gently. "You're exactly who you've always been. And you love who I am now? Not just who I was? I love who you are now," Benjamin said, and it was the most honest thing he'd ever said. "Memory or no memory, you're the woman I want to spend my life with." Sophie leaned into his touch, her eyes drifting closed. "Stay with me tonight? Just hold me? I feel so lost. But when you're here, I feel like maybe everything will be okay." Benjamin's heart broke and soared simultaneously. Of course. He held her as she fell asleep, her head on his shoulder, her breathing gradually evening out into peaceful rest. Benjamin stared at the ceiling and tried not to think about how right this felt, how perfectly she fit against him, how desperately he wanted this to be real instead of built on the foundation of her forgotten life. Benjamin was just drifting off to sleep when Sophie stirred, in his arms, and whispered something that made his blood freeze. "I dreamed about you," she said softly, her eyes still closed. "But it was different. You were watching me from far away and you looked so sad, like you wanted to tell me something but couldn't." She nestled closer to him, unaware of his sudden tension. "Why would I dream about you being sad when we're engaged?" It felt so real, like a memory trying to surface. Benjamin held his breath, realizing that Sophie's subconscious mind was starting to piece together fragments of their real relationship, and it was only a matter of time before she remembered the truth about everything. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm that felt both natural and surreal. Benjamin worked from home, ostensibly to care for Sophie during her recovery, but really because he couldn't bear to be away from her for more than a few hours. Sophie threw herself into physical therapy with characteristic determination, frustrated by her limitations but grateful for Benjamin's constant support. "I don't understand how you put up with me," Sophie said one morning as Benjamin helped her button a cardigan over her still-healing arm. "I can't remember our life together. I cry at random moments, and I can't even dress myself properly." "You're healing," Benjamin said, his fingers gentle as he worked the buttons. "And you're not putting up with anything. This is what people do when they love each other. They help each other through the hard parts." "Is that what we did? Before the accident?" Benjamin paused, remembering all the small ways Sophie had helped him without even knowing it. The way her presence in the duplex had made him feel less alone. The way her laughter in the common areas had drawn him out of his solitude. The way she'd inspired him to be braver than he'd ever been. "You helped me more than you know," he said truthfully. Every day brought small moments that felt like falling in love all over again. Sophie rediscovering her passion for design as she worked on projects from her laptop. the way she lit up when their garden bloomed, even though she couldn't remember planting it. Her delight in Mrs. Henderson's stories about the duplex's romantic history, listening with the fascination of someone hearing fairy tales for the first time. She says the house has magic, Sophie told Benjamin one evening as they sat in their garden, watching the sunset paint the sky in watercolors, that it brings people together who are meant to be together. Do you believe in that? Benjamin asked. Sophie was quiet for a moment, studying his profile in the golden light. I'm starting to. I can't remember falling in love with you, but being with you feels inevitable. Like coming home to something I didn't know I was searching for. Benjamin's chest tightened with emotion. That's exactly how it feels. Tell me about when you knew, Sophie said, curling up beside him on the garden bench. When you knew you loved me. Benjamin closed his eyes, remembering the exact moment, watching Sophie hum while arranging flowers for Mrs. Henderson, the way she'd smiled to herself when she thought no one was looking, the sudden overwhelming certainty that he would do anything to protect that happiness. It was a Tuesday morning, he said carefully. You were in the garden arranging flowers. You looked so content, so perfectly yourself, and I realized I'd been fooling myself thinking this was just attraction or infatuation. I was completely, irreversibly in love with you. That's beautiful, Sophie whispered. I wish I could remember how it felt to realize I loved you too. You will, Benjamin said, hoping it was true. Maybe not the memory, but the feeling. It's still there, Sophie. I can see it in the way you look at me, the way you trust me, the way you light up when I come home. You really think so? I know so. That night, as had become their routine, Benjamin tucked Sophie into bed and settled onto the couch with a book. But instead of her usual quick goodnight, Sophie lingered in her doorway, looking uncertain. Benjamin, can I ask you something that might sound crazy? Anything. Do you ever feel like we're falling in love for the first time, instead of remembering a love we already had? Benjamin's heart hammered against his ribs. What do you mean? I mean, every day with you feels like a discovery. Learning that you like your coffee black, that you hum when you're concentrating, that you have this way of listening that makes me feel like the most important person in the world. Sophie's voice was soft, wondering. It doesn't feel like remembering. It feels like beginning. Would that be a bad thing? No, Sophie said, her smile radiant even in the dim light. It feels like a gift, like getting to fall in love with you twice. Benjamin felt tears prick his eyes. If only she knew how close to the truth she was. The next morning brought their first real test. Sophie was in the kitchen making coffee when she suddenly went very still, her good hand gripping the counter. Benjamin? She called, her voice strange. He rushed to her side. What's wrong? I remembered something, Sophie said, her eyes wide with excitement and confusion. Just a flash, but I was standing in this kitchen, and you were here, but you were nervous about something. You kept running your hand through your hair the way you do when you're worried. Benjamin's mouth went dry. She was remembering one of their early morning encounters, back when he'd been tongue-tied around her, when every conversation had felt like a small miracle and a potential disaster. That's wonderful, he managed. What else do you remember? That's just it, Sophie said, turning to face him fully. In the memory we weren't like we are now. You seemed almost afraid to talk to me, like you barely knew me. Benjamin felt the world tilt beneath his feet. Memory can be tricky after an injury, but it felt so real, so specific. Sophie's brow furrowed in concentration. And there was something else. I think I was asking you about someone who had been leaving me gifts. Benjamin's heart stopped. She was remembering their conversation about the mysterious flowers and chocolates, back when she hadn't known he was the one leaving them. Sophie. It's probably nothing, Sophie said quickly, seeing his expression. Just my brain trying to piece things together in weird ways. Dr. Williams said recovery memories can get jumbled with dreams and imagination. Right, Benjamin said, relief flooding through him. Recovery is complicated. But as the day progressed, Benjamin noticed Sophie watching him with a new intensity, like she was trying to solve a puzzle she didn't quite understand. And when she thought he wasn't looking, he caught her studying their shared spaces with the analytical eye of someone conducting an investigation. That afternoon, while Benjamin was working in his office, he heard Sophie moving around in what she believed was their shared bedroom. When he went to check on her, he found her standing frozen in front of her closet, holding something in her trembling hand. "Benjamin," she said without turning around, her voice eerily calm. "Can you explain why all of your clothes are in a box hidden in the back of my closet? And why there's a letter in here addressed to the woman I love from afar?" Benjamin's entire world collapsed as he realized Sophie had found the box where he'd hidden his belongings to create their fake shared life. Along with the original notes he'd written before they ever spoke, notes that proved everything she believed about their relationship was a lie. Benjamin stood in Sophie's bedroom doorway, watching his carefully constructed world crumble in real time. Sophie held his hidden box of belongings in one hand and his old letter in the other, her face cycling through confusion, hurt, and dawning understanding. "This letter," Sophie said, her voice unnaturally steady, "is dated 3 weeks before you said we met. It talks about watching someone from a distance, about being invisible to the woman you love." She turned to face him, tears streaming down her face. "Benjamin, what is this?" "Sophie, I can explain. Can you? Because right now it looks like you've been lying to me about everything." Sophie's voice broke on the word everything. "These clothes hidden in my closet. You don't actually live here, do you? We don't actually share this apartment." Benjamin felt like he was drowning in the truth he'd been avoiding. "No, I live next door. Apartment B, so we're neighbors. Not fiancé. Sophie, please, let me... Are we even dating?" Sophie's question was barely a whisper, but it cut through Benjamin like a blade. "No," Benjamin said, the word falling between them like a stone. "We're friends. We were becoming friends." Sophie sank onto her bed, still holding the evidence of his deception. "Friends," she repeated numbly. "So when I woke up in the hospital and thought you were my fiancé," the nurse assumed. "You looked so relieved, so happy to have someone familiar. I couldn't bring myself to correct her. So you lied to me. While I was injured and confused and scared, you lied to me. I was trying to protect you." "Protect me?" Sophie's voice rose, anger finally breaking through her shock. "From what? The truth about my own life? From being alone and afraid? You were so lost, Sophie, when you thought we were engaged. It was the first time since the accident that you looked like yourself again." "Myself?" Sophie laughed, a bitter sound that made Benjamin's heart crack. "I haven't been myself for weeks. I've been playing the role of your fake fiancé in some elaborate fantasy you created." "It wasn't a fantasy," Benjamin said desperately. "My feelings for you are real. Everything I told you about loving you, about wanting to spend my life with you, that's all true. But based on a lie." Sophie stood up, pacing to the window, putting distance between them. "How am I supposed to believe anything you've said? How do I know what's real and what's part of your elaborate deception?" Benjamin felt tears burning his eyes. "Because you know me, Sophie. The person I've been these past weeks. That's who I really am. The way I feel about you, the way I take care of you, that's real. The person you've been is someone who lies to traumatized women in hospital beds," Sophie said coldly. "The person you've been is someone who manipulates confused accident victims into fake relationships. That's not... I never meant..." Benjamin ran his hands through his hair, desperate to find words that could fix this. "Sophie, I know I made a terrible mistake, but please, you have to believe that I love you." "Love me?" Sophie spun around, her eyes blazing. "You don't love me, Benjamin. You love some idea of me. You love the woman you created in your mind while you were watching me from your apartment window." "That's not true, isn't it? This letter talks about watching me, about documenting my daily routine, about creating elaborate fantasies about what our life together could be like." Sophie waved the letter like evidence in a trial. "That's not love, Benjamin. That's obsession." The word hit Benjamin like a physical blow. "It wasn't like that. I wasn't stalking you or anything sinister. I noticed you. I cared about you. I wanted to make your life a little brighter, without my knowledge or consent. I left you gifts. I was trying to work up the courage to ask you out properly. By lying to me about being my fiancé when I was at my most vulnerable, Sophie's voice cracked. God, Benjamin, do you have any idea how violated I feel right now? I've been sharing intimate moments with you, trusting you with my fears and confusion, believing we had this beautiful love story. We do have a beautiful. We have nothing. Sophie shouted, then immediately pressed her hand to her head, wincing. We have nothing real, Benjamin. Everything I thought I knew about us, about myself, about my life. It's all been an elaborate lie. Benjamin watched Sophie struggle with her emotions and physical pain, and felt the full weight of what he'd done crash over him. Sophie, please, sit down. You're pushing yourself too hard. Don't, Sophie said sharply. Don't you dare pretend to care about my well-being now. If you cared about my well-being, you would have told me the truth from the beginning. I was scared, Benjamin said quietly. I was scared that if you knew we barely knew each other, you'd ask me to leave. And I couldn't bear the thought of you going through this alone. So you decided to go through it together based on a lie. Yes, Benjamin said, his voice breaking. And I know that makes me selfish and cowardly and everything you think I am. But Sophie, these past weeks, getting to know you, taking care of you, falling deeper in love with you every day, that was real. The way you started to care for me too, that was real. Was it? Sophie's question was heartbreaking in its uncertainty. How do I know what I actually felt versus what I thought I was supposed to feel because you told me we were engaged? Benjamin had no answer for that. The truth was he didn't know either. Had Sophie's growing affection been genuine or just the result of his manipulation? Had her contentment in their fake relationship been real love or just the relief of having an anchor in her confusing new reality? I need you to leave, Sophie said finally, her voice exhausted. Sophie, please, Benjamin. I can't look at you right now without seeing every lie you told me. I need space to figure out what's real and what's not. Benjamin felt his world ending, but he nodded. Okay, I'll go. But Sophie, please believe me when I say that hurting you was the last thing I ever wanted to do. Then why did you do it? Benjamin looked at Sophie, really looked at her, maybe for the last time, and saw the woman he'd fallen in love with, now broken by his choices. Because I loved you so much, I was willing to become someone I'm not to keep you in my life. And that's the most selfish thing I've ever admitted. As Benjamin packed his hidden belongings from Sophie's apartment, he found one more thing that made his heart shatter completely. Sophie's journal, left open to a page dated just 2 days ago. In her careful handwriting, she'd written, I think I'm falling in love with Benjamin all over again. Not remembering our past feels like a gift, because I get to discover him fresh, without the weight of expectation. He makes me feel cherished and safe and beautiful. I can't wait to marry him. Below that, in fresh ink that was still wet, she'd added, I was such a fool. Benjamin spent the next 3 days in his apartment, listening to Sophie move around next door and fighting every instinct that told him to go to her, to explain, to somehow make this right. Sarah visited twice, shooting him looks that could have melted steel, and even Mrs. Henderson seemed cooler toward him when they crossed paths in the hallway. On the 4th day, Sophie knocked on his door. Benjamin opened it to find her standing there in a simple green dress, her arm out of its sling but still moving carefully. She looked tired but determined, and more beautiful than ever. Hi, she said quietly. Hi, Benjamin replied, his heart hammering against his ribs. Can I come in? We need to talk. Benjamin's apartment felt too small with Sophie in it, too intimate for the conversation he was sure they were about to have. She sat on his couch, the same couch where he'd spent so many evenings listening to her laughter through the thin walls, wishing he was brave enough to join her. I've been thinking, Sophie said, her hands folded carefully in her lap. About what you said. About your feelings being real, even if the situation wasn't. Sophie, let me finish, please. She took a deep breath. I talked to Dr. Williams about memory and emotion, about whether feelings developed under false pretenses can be genuine. She said something interesting, that love isn't just about the circumstances that create it. It's about how two people choose to treat each other, how they make each other feel, how they respond to each other's needs. Benjamin barely dared to breathe. What are you saying? I'm saying that I've been trying to figure out what was real about these past weeks, and what was manufactured by your deception. Sophie's voice was steady but soft. And the truth is, I felt cherished. I felt seen and understood and cared for in ways I've never experienced before. Was that because you lied to me about being my fiancé? Or was that because of who you are as a person? I don't know, Benjamin admitted. I hoped it was because of who I am, but I can't separate it from the lie either. Neither can I, Sophie said. And that's the problem. Benjamin's heart sank. This was it. The moment she told him she could never trust him again, never forgive him for what he'd done. But, Sophie continued, and Benjamin's head snapped up. I want to find out. What do you mean? Sophie stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the garden they'd planted together. I mean, I want to start over. Completely over. Not as fake fiancés, not as neighbors with a complicated history, but as two people who are interested in getting to know each other honestly. Benjamin felt hope flutter in his chest like a caged bird. You want to start over? I want to try, Sophie said, turning to face him. Because here's what I figured out during 3 days of crying and being angry and feeling sorry for myself. I miss you. Not the fake version of you, not the pretend relationship, but you. The way you make me laugh, the way you listen to me talk about design like it's the most fascinating thing in the world, the way you brought me lavender lotion because you remembered I said it helps me sleep. You miss me? I miss my friend Benjamin, who left me anonymous flowers and made perfect coffee and helped me plant a garden. Sophie's smile was tentative but genuine. I want to know if there's something real between us, something that exists without the hospital lies and fake engagement. And how do we do that? We date, Sophie said simply, like normal people. You ask me out properly, I say yes or no based on whether I actually want to go out with you, and we see what happens when everything between us is honest. Benjamin stared at her, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. You'd be willing to do that? After everything I put you through? Benjamin, what you did was wrong. It was manipulative and selfish, and it hurt me deeply. Sophie's voice was firm but not unkind. But I also understand why you did it. You saw someone you cared about in pain, and you made a split-second decision to try to help, even though it was the wrong decision. It was selfish. Yes, it was. But it was also human. Flawed and misguided, but human. Sophie came back to the couch, sitting closer to Benjamin than she had since discovering his deception. I don't want to spend the rest of my life wondering what could have happened between us if we'd started honestly. What if we try dating and it doesn't work? What if whatever we had was only because of the unusual circumstances? Then we'll know, Sophie said. And we can go back to being neighbors who nod politely in the hallway. But what if it does work? What if we discover that underneath all the lies and confusion there really is something worth fighting for? Benjamin looked at Sophie, really looked at her, and saw not the broken woman from the hospital, or the angry woman who'd discovered his deception, but the strong, generous, hopeful woman who was willing to give them both a second chance. Sophie Bennett, he said, his voice formal and nervous and filled with more hope than he'd felt in days. Would you like to have dinner with me tonight? A real first date, where I pick you up at your door and we go somewhere nice and I try to impress you with my conversation and terrible jokes? Sophie's smile lit up the room. Benjamin Cross, I would love to have dinner with you tonight. Really? Really, but I have conditions. Benjamin's heart skipped. Name them. No more lies. No more pretending to be something we're not. No more trying to protect me from my own life. If we're going to do this, we do it honestly, even when the truth is uncomfortable or scary. Deal, Benjamin said immediately. Anything else? Yes, Sophie said, her eyes twinkling with mischief that reminded Benjamin of why he'd fallen for her in the first place. You have to tell me the real story of how you fell in love with me. The true version, not the sanitized version you told your fake fiancé. Benjamin felt his cheeks warm. The real story involves me being incredibly awkward and possibly creepy in my devotion to your daily routine. I want to hear every awkward, creepy detail, Sophie said, laughing. I want to know about the real Benjamin who fell for the real Sophie, before hospitals and lies and fake engagements complicated everything. That might take several dates to cover completely. Good thing I'm not going anywhere, Sophie said, reaching out to take his hand. We have all the time in the world to get this right. As Benjamin looked down at their intertwined fingers, he felt something settle in his chest that he'd never experienced before. Not the desperate longing of unrequited love, not the guilty panic of maintaining a lie, but the quiet joy of honest possibility. They had been strangers who became friends, friends who became fake fiancés, and fake fiancés who were now choosing to become something real. It wasn't the love story Benjamin had imagined, but it was theirs. Messy and complicated and built on the foundation of second chances. And for the first time since that terrible night at the hospital, Benjamin believed they might actually get their happy ending after all. 6 months later, Benjamin was kneeling in their shared garden, not to propose with a ring, but to plant the sunflowers Sophie had requested for their upcoming wedding. Their real wedding, planned by two people who knew exactly who they were and what they meant to each other. "Are you sure about this?" Sophie asked, watching him dig in the dirt with a smile that held no reservations, no questions, only joy. "I'm sure," Benjamin said, looking up at the woman who had taught him that the best love stories aren't the ones that start perfectly, but the ones where two people choose each other honestly, again and again. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." And this time, when he said it, Sophie remembered every moment that had led them here, the real ones and the imagined ones, the mistakes and the second chances, the long journey from strangers to friends to lovers to partners. This time, there were no lies between them, only truth and hope, and the promise of a future they would build together, one honest moment at a time.